All right, what's going on, guys? Nick here with Late Night Chess, and today is going to be the first video in probably a recurring series where I'm going to walk you guys through some of the visualization practices that I've been going through to kind of improve my chess. And so I've been doing visualization exercises for the past year or so, and I've seen really, really strong improvement in my chess. And before I kind of share with you an example about something that I've been doing, I first kind of wanted to talk to you about what visualization is and why it's important to understand this better as you're trying to improve in chess. So when I think about different ways, different parts of chess that you can improve on, a lot of people think about, studying endgames or openings or doing tactics or understanding middle game strategy. And obviously all of those things are really important if you want to improve in chess. But then there's parts of chess that I would consider maybe like meta improvements in chess that are not studying endgames or openings, but more things like how do you better manage your time when you're playing a chess game, or how do you improve your calculation or your visualization or your evaluation. Those are also very important skills in chess that are important to know, but they're not quite, I guess, as intuitive or obvious that those are things you need to study. It's much easier to say, oh, I need to improve tactics, or I need to understand, the Lucina position in an end game. And those things are important, but it's also important to improve your visualization skills, for example. So what is visualization? Visualization is essentially your ability to see pieces on squares of the board that they're not currently on, right? And the reason why this is obviously very important is because you pair visualization with other techniques like evaluation and calculation to then decide whether or not you want to do a sequence of moves. And so that's really all visualization is. It's imagining pieces on a board that are not currently in front of your eyes. So there's a lot of ways you can practice visualization. One method is blindfold chess, for example. Another method would be the one that I'm going to be sharing with you today, which is imagining a game a certain number of moves ahead and trying to picture where they are on the board. So that's what I'm going to share with you guys today. And I'll probably do a few more videos with this with different additional moves. So let me share with you kind of what I've done and what has helped me a lot with visualization. So when I want to work on my visualization skills, what I'll do is I will pick a random master or grandmaster game, and what I'll set up a board right next to me. And what I'll do is I'll go through maybe the first X number of moves, call it 5, 10, 3 moves ahead. I'll read the notation, and then I'll reconstruct those pieces on that board. And then I'll do another 3 moves or 5 moves or 10 moves and try to reconstruct those pieces on the board. I'm not evaluating the game. I'm not studying the opening. I'm not calculating the different tactics that a person might have missed in the game. I'm purely just taking a random game. It doesn't matter how good or bad the game is. I pick master and above games, but it really doesn't matter. And I just say, okay, they made these first 5 moves. Let me see if I can just put those pieces on the board. Okay, they made these next 5 moves. Let me put those pieces on the board. And then I just check to see if I was correct or not. So that's what we're going to do today. So since this is a video, I'm not going to put a board right next to me and show you how I'm doing it. But if you want to follow along, I would encourage you to maybe set up a board right next to you. And as you're going through this video, we can do this together, right? Now you can pause the video when it's appropriate and try and reconstruct the board. So on the screen, you see 2 boards, one to the left, which I'll call my physical board, which is the board that I typically would have in front of me. And then to the bottom, right below my face, is the board that I'm going to check. So in other words, I'm going to make my guess of where I think the pieces are on the board to the left. And then once I think I've kind of have my answer, I'll check on the board below. So I picked a random game. This is a game between Magnus Carlsen and Fabiano Caruana. I actually didn't check what year this was played. I didn't check. I don't even know who won. I have not even gone through this game. This might have been a world champion game. It might not have. I really have no clue. This could have been a blitz game that they played online. But I just went through the database on chess.com and picked a random game. And so what I'm going to do in this video is do 5 moves ahead. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the first 5 moves and then reconstruct those pieces on the board. And so after I read the first 5 moves, if you want to pause the video, feel free to try to reconstruct the board yourself, and you can kind of check with the answers. So this is, I know it seems kind of like a silly exercise, but really the point of it is to imagine the pieces on the board a certain number of moves ahead, and that will obviously help your chess as you're playing games. So let's go ahead and get started. If you guys really enjoyed this video or you found it to be really helpful, please put a comment below saying that you found this helpful, and make a suggestion for maybe what the next video should be. Do we want to do 10 moves ahead, or maybe this is too hard and you want to do 3 or 2 moves ahead, and we can create a video doing one of those things as well. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to read out the first 5 moves, and then we'll try and recreate the moves on the board. So, okay, and Magnus Carlsen, if you care, is white, and Caruana is black. Okay, so the first move is c4. Black responds g6, then e4, e5, knight c3, bishop g7, g3, d6, knight g to e2, and c5. Okay, let's read that one more time, and then I'm going to try and put those pieces on the board. So c4, g6, e4, e5, knight c3, bishop g7, g3, d6, knight g to e2, and c5. Okay, so let's imagine that board. And if you want to now, feel free to pause and try and reconstruct that position. So I believe we have a pawn on c4, we have a pawn on e4, we have a knight on c3, a knight on e2, and we have g3, but the bishop's not fianchettoed yet. And then for black, we have a pawn on g6, a pawn on e5, we have a bishop on g7, a pawn on d6, and a pawn on c5. Okay, I'm just visualizing that now. Okay, now I'm going to try and recreate that position on my quote-unquote board. So I believe we have a pawn on c4, we have a pawn on e5, a pawn on g3, we have a knight on e2, and a knight on c3. And for black, I believe we have a pawn here, a bishop here, a pawn here, and I think we also have a pawn on d6. I believe this is the position. Okay, so now let's check and see if we were correct. So now we'll go to the game and actually make the moves. c4, g6, e4, e5, knight f3, bishop g7, g3, d6, knight ge2, and pawn on c5. So just checking to see if those line up. Okay, so I already made a mistake. I meant to put the pawn on e5 instead of e6. So let's do that real quick. Okay, so I did miss something there. Okay, let's go ahead and try the next 5 moves. Okay, so next 5 moves, we've got d3, knight to c6, bishop to g2, knight g to e7, a3, the knight on c6 just comes into d4, it looks like. Then b4, so white's kind of expanding on the queen side with a3, b4. Then bishop to g4, h3, kicking the bishop, and then bishop takes e2. So let's go over that one more time. Pawn to d3, knight to c6, bishop to g2, knight g to e7, a3, knight d4, b4, bishop g4, h3, and bishop takes e2. Okay, so that means we've got a black bishop on e2. We have a knight the knight on b8 is now on d4. Black's other knight, I believe, is on e7. I believe that's the only difference in black's position. I think for white's position, we have a pawn on d3. That e2 knight is gone. There's a bishop on g2, and then white has a pawn on a3 and b4. So let's recreate that and see if we're right. So I believe white has a pawn here and a pawn here. This e2 knight's off the board, and there's a bishop on g2 and a pawn on d3. This black bishop has teleported over to e2. This knight is over on d4. This knight is on e7. Oh, white also has a pawn on h3. Let's not forget that. Okay. I believe that's it. So let's check and see if we were correct. So we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 moves ahead. Let's see if that lines up. Okay, looks like it lines up. Great. All right, let's do the next 5 moves. So knight takes e2, knight takes e2, queen takes e2, knight c6, rook b1, b6, castles, castles, bishop e3, and rook c8. Okay, let's read it one more time. Knight takes e2, knight takes e2, queen takes e2. So that knight, bishop, and knight are off the board. Now there's a queen on e2. The knight's moved to c6. The black knight has moved to c6. Rook to b1. Pawn to b6. Castles and castles. Bishop e3. And rook to c8. Okay, pause the video if you want to give it a try, and I'll move these pieces. So I believe this knight is off the board, this knight is off the board, this bishop's off the board, we have a queen on e2, we have a rook on b1, and white has castled, and there's also a bishop on e3. Black has a pawn on b6, a rook on c8, black has also castled, and I believe that is all of black's position, because black did a lot of captures here. Took with the knight. Oh, the knight is also on c6, if I remember correctly. That's right. Okay, that's what I'm saying is the position, so let's check and see if that's true. We're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 moves ahead, and let's just compare. Okay, looks good. Great, let's do the next 5 moves. Okay, the queen is now sliding over to d2. Rook to c7. King to h1. King to h8. Rook to b2. Pawn to f5. Rook b to b1. Interesting move. Knight to d4. Notice that knight on d4 is not hitting the queen because the queen is on d2. Bishop takes d4, and c takes d4. One more time. The queen is coming to d2. Rook to c7. King to h1. King to h8. Rook to b2. Pawn to f5. Rook b to b1. So the rook came back to b1. Knight to d4. Bishop takes d4. And c takes d4. Okay, let's create the position. So I believe this knight is off the board, this bishop is off the board, and this c-pawn is here. This b1 rook actually moved twice, and it's back on b1. There's a rook on c7. Both the kings are on the h-file. And black made this pawn push f5, and let's not forget the queen's on d2. Okay, I feel pretty good about that, so let's check and see how correct we were. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 moves ahead, and let's compare with my board. And it looks correct. Great. Okay, 5 more moves. Now, e takes on f5, G takes f5, bishop to d5, queen to e8, pawn to b5, rook to e7, rook b to e1. That rook's making a lot of moves. Pawn to e4. Okay, the black pawn to e4. f4, pawn to f4. And the black pawn on e4 takes en passant on f3. E takes f3. Okay, let's go over one more time. So e takes f5, g takes f5, bishop d5, queen e8, pawn to b5, rook to e7. So that queen and rook are kind of doubled on the e file. Rook b to e1, e4, f4, and e takes f3. So I believe we have doubled black pawns on the f file. There's one on f5, there's one on f3. The g6 pawn is gone, so I'm just imagining that. And then we have a lot of pieces on the e file now. We've got black's queen and rook on the e file. White has a rook on the e file. That black pawn on f3 is threatening white's bishop on g2. And also white has a pawn on b5, if I remember correctly. So let's reconstruct that. So I believe this pawn is gone. This pawn is gone, and we have what? We have this pawn here. And then I believe we have a queen and a rook here. We have a rook here, and there's a pawn on b5. And this f pawn is gone because it pushed to f4. Let's see. I believe this is the position. Okay, let's test it. We're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and I already see a mistake that I made. 5. Oh, okay, so yes, the mistake that I made is I forgot to put this white bishop on d5, and I incorrectly assumed that the black pawn was threatening the white bishop, but this bishop's actually all the way over here on d5. So this is why visualization is important, right? Because if you had calculated this variation and saw that the pawn was on f3 and you forgot that your bishop was on d5, you might incorrectly think that this pawn is threatening something on g2 when in reality it's not, right? So let's just compare the rest of the board and see if that looks right. Okay, looks good to me. All right, 5 more moves ahead. So rook takes e7, queen takes e7, rook takes f3, bishop e5, pawn to a4, queen to g7, queen to f2, rook to f6, rook takes f5, and bishop takes g3. Okay, a lot of captures and movements here, guys. So let's go over this one more time very slowly. Rook takes e7, queen takes e7, rook takes f3, bishop e5, a4, queen to g7, queen to f2, so that queen's behind the rook on f3, rook to f6, rook takes f5. Oh no, I accidentally moved everything. Oh gosh. Okay, sorry about that, guys. I accidentally clicked on the move. All right, we'll still roll with it. And then bishop takes g3. Okay, so there is a black queen on g7, a black bishop on g3. The rook is on f6. The black rook is on f6 facing off with the white rook on f5, I believe. And the white queen is on f2. I don't believe that white bishop is moved, and there is a pawn on a4, if I remember correctly. So let's try and reconstruct that. Again, apologies for accidentally moving everything. So I know this rook is off the board, and this rook is off the board. This pawn is off the board, and this bishop is here. This pawn is off the board, and this pawn is off the board. There's a rook on f5 and a queen on f2. This queen's over on g7, I believe, and I believe this rook is on f6, and this pawn is on a4. Okay, so that's what we're going to go with. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 moves ahead. And let's spot check with what my guess was, and that looks good. Okay. All right, now we only have about 8 more moves ahead. Let's just for fun, let's do 8 moves. Let's see if we can do all 8 moves at the end of the game. I don't know if there's a checkmate or somebody resigns, but let's try and do all 8 moves, guys. So here we go. So white moves his queen to f3, bishop to e5, bishop to e6, rook takes f5, bishop takes f5, queen to g5, bishop to e4. So I think there's a bishop on e4 and a bishop on e5. King to g7. Queen to g4. So kind of offering a trade here. Queen takes g4. H takes g4. h6 and king g2. Okay, so relatively quiet position at the end. Looks kind of drawish, actually. But let's try it one more time. Let's just go through every move. See if we can get 8 here. So queen f3, bishop to e5, bishop to e6, rook takes f5, bishop takes f5, queen to g5, bishop to e4, king to g7, queen to g4, queen takes g4, h takes g4, h6, and king g2. So I think at the end of the day, really no pawns have moved at all except for white's pawn has moved to e4. The rooks are off the board. The queens are off the board. Both the kings are on the g file on g2, g7. And I believe both the bishops are on the e file on e5, e4. So I'm just visualizing that. No queens, no rooks. King's on the g file. Pawn is on h4. The black bishop is on e5 and the white bishop is on e4. That's my what I believe where we are. So let's just construct that. Rooks are off the board. Queens are off the board. This black bishop is here. This bishop is here. There's a king here. There's a king here. And you can kind of understand why the game ended here. We've got a pretty boring opposite colored bishop endgame. So let's check and see if that's the right position. Oh, of course it's not the right position. Of course, this pawn took the queen that was facing off against the king, and black moved to h6. So I visualized these 2 pawns, right? Everything else looks good. So hence the reason why it's important and this pawn's here. Hence the reason why it's important to practice your visualization skills, because if you can't evaluate properly, or if you can't visualize properly, you're not going to be able to evaluate properly. Now, luckily, I think it's still a pretty drawish endgame either way, but I believe this is the position. So yeah, anyway, guys, what I wanted to share with you is something that I've been working on to get better at. As you can tell from this video, I'm by no means an expert, something I'm still trying to work on and improve on. But it is so important to be able to visualize pieces on squares that they're not, again, so that you can evaluate properly and ensure that the variations that you're calculating are really accurate and possible variations, right? So anyway, I hope this was helpful for you. Would strongly encourage you to go ahead and give this a try yourself with whatever move number you're comfortable with. If you're just starting out and your visualization is really weak, I would suggest starting out with 2, 3 moves ahead. If you're very strong with your visualization skills, I would go 10 plus moves ahead. And one way to kind of challenge yourself to see improvement is if you start with, say, 3 moves ahead and you're able to do an entire game correctly, then try 4 moves ahead and keep doing that until you have an entire game where you can do 4 moves ahead, and then go up to 5, 6, 7. This is a very helpful way to improve visualization. So anyways, I hope you guys found this video to be helpful. We'll probably do some more visualization examples with different move orders. Maybe we'll do 3 moves, 10 moves, and you guys can go ahead and try along with the games that I do. So anyway, if you guys enjoy this video, please feel free to comment in the comment section on kind of what you'd want the next move number to be. And if you guys enjoyed this video and other videos I have, please subscribe. It definitely helps me to kind of see who's enjoying the videos. And then also follow me on Twitch. I've done visualization exercises live on Twitch before, so my Twitch handle is right below my face, Incandito1. So definitely give me a follow over there as well. So thanks, guys, and until next time, talk to you soon.